Have you ever played a game that promised infinite worlds or endless replayability, only to realize it all feels the same? And I bet that game that popped into your mind made sure to include the magic words: procedural generation. Because procedural generation sounds like magic. Maps that build themselves, enemies that change, missions and dialogues that we write every time. But it is not the revolutionary technology it's made out to be. It's just a tool, and like any other tool, the result depends on how you use it. And it can either improve your game, bringing it to the next level, or it can completely ruin the experience. The reality is that random doesn't equal interesting, and just because something is different doesn't mean it's better. So stick with me, because I'm gonna break down why procedural generation is not always the answer, and how it can make or break a game. But first, what does procedural even mean? In simple terms, it's a way of creating content, like levels, enemies, or even entire worlds, using algorithms instead of crafting everything manually. So, rather than having a designer placing every rock and every tree, the game runs a set of rules that generate them for you. It's efficient, it saves time, and it can produce a huge amount of content with relatively little effort. Sounds perfect, right? But to show you how this actually plays out in a game, let's build a world together. Here's a super simple example that anyone can understand. Imagine we are trying to generate a map, and we have 4 types of tiles: water, forest, sand, and rocks. First, let's try randomness. I can set the chances of each terrain spawning, let's say to 25% each, and then I can grab a brush, fill the entire screen, and this is the result. Weird, right? You got forest in the middle of the ocean, no shape whatsoever, and overall, it just doesn't feel like a real map. Instead, let's define some rules or procedures to make it feel more like, well, like a map. First, we fill the entire map with water, and then we can spawn some sand, forming big clumps. But right now it feels empty, so let's add the forest. This forest can appear anywhere that's currently a sand block and is not adjacent to water. And last but not least, we can add rocks in random tiles, currently populated by sand or forest, making sure that there are no adjacent rocks. By writing the code for these, we could end up with results such as this one, or this one, which is way better than a completely random map. But this is not a video on how to implement procedural generation. It's a video on how just because it's procedural doesn't mean it's better, and how procedural just became another buzzword for marketing. Back in the early days, games like Rogue or Elite used procedural generation out of necessity. There wasn't enough storage space to include handcrafted levels, and there weren't huge teams behind those games to craft those levels either way. So instead, they generated those worlds, because they needed to. But then, things changed. Indie developers came in, and they made it sound sexy. Procedural generation went from being a technical limitation to a marketing feature. Suddenly, it was not about saving space, it was about something innovative. Infinite replayability, unlimited content. Never the same thing twice. That's gold on a Steam page because for some reason, players still value games based on their duration. Now, let me be clear, a ton of games do it really well, and I love a proper implementation of procedural generation in places where it belongs. Games like Spelunky, Slay the Spire, Enter the Gungeon, they nail it. They understand that randomness needs structure to feel good. But then, there's the other side. You've got games like No Man's Sky. It's mostly fixed now, but when it first launched, it was a literal universe contained within your game. And somehow, most of it felt empty, repetitive, or just straight up boring. Another example is the recently released Repo, a cooperative horror game where you have to extract valuables from places with different creatures lurking in them. Please, don't hate me, the game is great, I know everyone is loving it, and I had tons of fun with it. But honestly, I couldn't help but wonder if the game wouldn't be better with handcrafted levels like those in Phasmophobia. Because after playing Repo 10 times, we already started to feel like it was always the same. And meanwhile, Phasmophobia lasted me and my friends a good 3 months of fun. Technically, there's also procedural generation going on. The ghost is different each time, the missions are different, the items are different, etc. There was just no need to create random rooms that ended up feeling the same. Because somehow, literally playing in the same house over and over again was less repetitive than the randomly generated levels. And the biggest problem that I have with procedural generation, the reason why I sat down to write this script, is that so many indie developers are seeing this trend where it seems like a requisite to add some randomness. And they are coming up with game ideas where the twist is only the procedural generation itself. For example, Stardew Valley, but with procedural generation. Or Hollow Knight, but with procedural generation. And my honest reaction to that is, why? Don't. One thing that I always ask myself whenever I'm working on a new element for my game is, what value does this provide? How does this make my game more interesting or fun or appealing in any way? And if you ask me that question about a Stardew Valley clone, but with procedural generation, I honestly cannot think of a single advantage to it. You risk creating a world where a certain NPC is so far away that you would have to spend the entire day just walking to their store to get something. Or maybe, certain resources would be so scarce that you could never upgrade some tools. And you may think, well yeah, but I can adjust the rules to generate the map in such a way that doesn't happen. Okay, sure, but then, why not handcraft it? It's a game where the layout actually matters for multiple reasons, and making it different each playthrough doesn't make it better. In fact, Stardew Valley does have procedural generation. Many things will depend on your luck for the day. The layout for each cave level is different every time, although they are pre-made, and the resources that appear throughout the map are also different, because those things actually add value. It makes the world feel alive and natural. But you always know where the quarry is, and the best spots to fish or where to upgrade your tools. Because at the end of the day, procedural generation is just a tool, not a mechanic, not a genre, and definitely not a selling point on its own. It's something you use when it makes your game better, not something you throw in because it's trending on devlogs or because it makes a good bullet point for your Steam page. In Rogue Inferno, my own game, I decided to go with handcrafted battlefields. And not because I hate procedural generation, clearly I don't. But it just made sense. I could have spent weeks trying to write an algorithm that generates fair and interesting layouts, so that I could earn that tag, as well as the roguelike tag, which many people will complain about me using because of the pre-made battlefields. But it wasn't worth the trade-off. There was too much risk of creating weird shapes where either the enemies or the player would get stuck. Instead, I opened the tilemap editor and I started designing them myself. I wasn't trying to create infinite variety. I just wanted each fight to feel intentional. There's still plenty of procedural generation going on. Enemies are spawned based on difficulty, progress, and player performance. And the rewards and events are randomized within a pool, which works great because that kind of randomness is interesting. And procedural generation was just another part of the equation. Oh, you're still here? In case my game grabbed your attention, I present to you Rogue Inferno, a roguelike deck builder where every move matters. Wish this now and check this video next. See ya!